Hey guys, today I want to talk about storyboarding and a few thoughts I've had about storyboarding and what it is and why it's so darn difficult. What you can see here is me doing some storyboarding for one of my short films which I'm working on, which I have been working on. It's kind of on the back burner right now, but this is me doing some of the storyboards for the two main characters, their backstory, because I wanted to show the two characters sharing positive experiences together. So this is me trying to do that in a few different ways that I can think of, but I ended up having to cut these parts out mostly from the finished result. I felt like I wanted to keep the animation quite short. Even though this would have added to the story as a whole, it just would have made the whole thing too long. So I'm always conscious of keeping it within a time limit that I can manage. So I could come up with about 4, maybe 5 different factors to storyboarding, which creates a kind of, depending on how you look at it, it can either be a tug of war between these 4 or 5 factors, or it can be like a balancing act where you try and balance them all. But I'll first explain what they are. The first one I want to talk about is one that is actually kind of basic, and yet I struggle with it, and I know a lot of learning animators who also struggle a lot with it. And this is establishing the layout in your animation. So how I can imagine this is you have all of the shots in your animation, and by revealing the shots and being very clear with where everything is in the shots, your audience is aware of a general layout of the area and how the characters can get from one key place to another in the directions that they go in the frame. So this is helped by using establishing shot and also keeping to the 180 degree rule. That's super important because that way it keeps it very grounded and it stops your viewers from going disoriented. This is something that I still struggle with, it's really difficult, and it seems like such a basic one, but it is very, very difficult, especially if you're in a location which is very complex. The other element to storyboarding is creating appealing composition. So these are compositions in the frame which look nice and they kind of flow well together. In his book Dream Worlds, Hans Bacher talks about keeping or holding back these really nice looking compositions and crazy staging effects towards the end of the film, so you've kind of got something up your sleeve to show your audience and to build it to a climax of sorts. In fact, his book in general is really good for getting these amazing looking compositions because he breaks it down and shows you how you can make your own. So I recommend Dream Worlds to anyone watching this. Perhaps your choice of lenses you want to imitate, like film lenses you might imitate when creating a composition, that might influence the aesthetic appeal as well as kind of what you're trying to tell with your storyboarding. The next element of this that I want to talk about is emotional composition. So this is like changing your composition to be sympathetic towards your character's emotions. I think if you're telling a narrative story where you have strong characters that you want the audience to feel for, you might prioritize this instead of appealing composition. And appealing composition might be more suited to something like a music video where it's mostly just flashy and it looks nice. Of course, my aim is to be able to do both at the same time if that's possible. The other element I could think of, which is slightly different from the others, is your kind of visual grammar. Basically, film isn't as free as you think it is. Actually, for the audience to understand what's happening in your film, you kind of need to stick fairly closely to the grammar of filmmaking. These are like the rules of filmmaking that you'll find. And it's things like, you start off with an establishing shot, then you go to a mid shot, then a close up, then you go for a shot, reverse shot in dialogues and things like that. These are little rules that are pretty essential to the grammar of filmmaking, and people understand them. This isn't to say that you can't break the rules, but you should be able to use the rules and in order to break them, and you should only break them if you have a very good reason for doing so. This is where I'm talking about a tug of war. So if you have a very complex scene with lots of different characters, you might be tempted to show the whole thing from a bird's eye view, so you can see the whole thing as if it's a map and you know where everything is. So there you will completely tick the box of establishing the layout of your scene, but it won't necessarily be as appealing as something you could create with using low angles as well, and having different angles and other playful compositions. And also it might not be emotionally the best way to communicate what's going on in the story. So there you have a complete tug to just establishing the layout and conveying what's happening in the scene, but with none of the emotional impacts that you could potentially use. Okay, so now an example of an emotional composition. This would be where the scene is, it's on a Dutch tilt, it's chaotic, it's close into the face, because there's something very intense and stressful, and there's lots of tension happening in the scene, but we have no idea what's going on because it's at a Dutch tilt, so we're kind of off by a bit, and it's really close into the character. We don't know what's going on around them, so that creates a problem. And for the last example, something which would be too much in the realm of an appealing composition, you're using the Fibonacci spiral or the rule of thirds or something, and the composition just looks lovely. It looks like a painting of sorts, but it doesn't reflect what the characters are actually thinking and feeling. So you kind of have less, as an audience, you have less of an idea. You can't really feel what's happening through the composition. It doesn't matter too much if you've got very good dialogue or something, or very good music that could kind of compensate. But also things like the layout, if you're not paying attention to the layout or the composition of the shots, or like the grammar of filmmaking, you might be throwing off your audience and then being a bit more confused than they are in tune with the film. And one of the most important parts of the film, one of the base level things you have to do, is you have to make the audience understand it. And sometimes people, they don't realize this, but they're experimenting and stuff, but they've left their audience behind. Their audience don't know what's going on. So that's something you've got to make sure you take care of before you go with the appealing, really nice looking, fancy stuff. And so when you go too far in any of these directions, it creates a problem. So you want to have a kind of balance of each one. That's the end of the video, so please let me know in the comments if you agree with me or have any other opinions about it. I'd like to know, and subscribe if you haven't already. I bring out new videos every week, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. Scalable, so still, if you only did sleep and work, you could still only get a certain amount done. But it is going to really help some of you who maybe you only make one animation a year, or you're only being able to make a little bit